what they say. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a New Yorker. You know what? Let me back up. Back in 2011, before he was ever president, Donald Trump took a visiting Sarah Palin to get a slice of New York pizza. Instead of bringing her to any number of older or more acclaimed pizzerias, for which New York is famous worldwide, Trump took Palin to a chain pizza restaurant called Famous Familia, which wasn't even run by Italians. The media had a field day. The de facto king of New York had essentially pulled a Michael Scott, and it was something to be ashamed about. The host of The Daily Show at the time, Jon Stewart, who already had a history of sharing his strong opinions on pizza, really let Donald have it. In response to Trump's pizza blunder, Stewart named 8 real New York pizzerias that would have been better representations of the city's rich Italian heritage. 10 years later, in 2021, my friend Anthony and I set out to eat all 8 slices of real New York pizza that Jon Stewart mentioned in his pizza rant. On this journey, we discovered that not only was that a hard, nearly impossible task, but that the history of New York pizza is wild, filled with turf wars, bad blood, and backstabbing. I'll start from the beginning. Sometime in the late 1700s or early 1800s, lower-income citizens of Naples, Italy started adding tomatoes as toppings onto their flatbread, an already cheap and common meal. Though the specifics are hard to nail down, this is generally agreed upon as the birth of pizza. About a century later, Italians began immigrating en masse to America, with many settling down in New York City. Among these brave immigrants was a young man named Gennaro Lombardi, who opened up a grocery store in the neighborhood we now call Little Italy. One of the employees at Lombardi's began making and selling tomato pies in the Neapolitan tradition. However, since many of their customers were lower-income factory workers who couldn't afford an entire pie, Lombardi's began dividing their pies and selling them by the slice. Lombardi's opened at the turn of the century, and since then, thousands of pizzerias have sprung up around New York, and you can find a slice of classic, wide-cut, thin-crust cheese pizza on almost any corner in the city. I moved to New York City at the beginning of 2016, over 100 years after Lombardi's opened. It didn't take long to realize one big, important thing. Just because you're in New York, that doesn't make you a New Yorker. I had a lot to learn and a ton to explore, so I got to work. I started visiting New York's landmarks during my free time. Tall buildings, famous monuments, movie locations. It felt, and still feels, pretty touristy. But honestly, I often feel like a tourist here anyway. I don't know what criteria you have to meet to be able to say you're from this city, or from anywhere really. But whatever those benchmarks are, I know I haven't met them yet. Not all of them, at least. Anyway, one day last year, I needed to run an errand on Staten Island, which is a place that I do not go very often. I live in Brooklyn, which is at least connected to all the other boroughs by train, but to get to Staten Island, you either need to take a car or the ferry. It's just kind of a headache. So, since I was going somewhere I don't usually go, I called up one of my best friends, Anthony.
Hey, I'm Anthony.
He also moved here in 2016. And while I like to seek out touristy things, Anthony likes to find unique restaurants in New York. Anthony's taken me on dozens of food adventures around the city, none of which I would have ever found on my own.
We did the roast beef rally, where we went to 2 different roast beef sandwich restaurants back to back on the same day, Brennan and Cars and Rollin' Roaster. We did the 90s Burger King out in Bushwick, where all the decor and all the stuff is still stuck in the 90s. We went and got the Teamster sandwich from 30 Rock, which is based on a real sandwich from Fiore's in Hoboken. We got pizza from Pizza Land out in New Jersey, which is the pizzeria shown in the opening of The Sopranos. We went to a Brazilian steakhouse once. We watched all 3 Harold and Kumar movies one day, and then just went and got a bunch of White Castle in the middle of it.
So I asked Anthony if he wanted to drive out to Staten Island with me, and to my surprise,
I was like, sure, but can we go to Denino's?
Denino's opened as a Staten Island tavern in 1937. and they've been selling pizza from that same location since 1951. It's listed among New York's best pizza places in Time Out magazine and the Zagat survey, and you might recognize it as the place where Pete Davidson worked in The King of Staten Island. The pizza was amazing. It was cooked to perfection, the cheese was rich and gooey, the sauce was sweet and tangy. A+, no notes. While we were eating, I asked Anthony how he knew about this place. And he said,
There's this rant that Jon Stewart gave when he was on The Daily Show about what real New York style pizza is.
I said, oh yeah, the one about Chicago pizza not being better than New York pizza?
Deep dish pizza is not only not better than New York pizza, it's not pizza.
And he said, no.
That's not the one. That one's also hilarious, but this other one was about what New York style pizza really is, and he lists like 7 or 8 different restaurants.
Go down to Lombardi's, oldest pizzeria in town, Little Italy, founded in 1905. They make their own pork sausage. You go to Grimaldi's, under the Brooklyn Bridge, a brick oven, but go there early. By 4 o'clock, the line's out to the East River. Totonno's, Coney Island, marron, thin crust with sweet sauce. Arturo's on Houston Street, coal oven, lightly charred crust. Go to John's. Oh, John's. Go to the one on Bleecker if that's full. Go to the John's on the Upper West Side. It's not the same vibe, but the pies. Denino's on Staten Island. They got the breadcrumbs on the bottom. Go, Joe's on Carmine Street. Just get a slice. Go to Joe's on Carmine Street. Donald. What the are you doing?
Once I moved to New York, I was like looking up the food places I should go, because that's like pretty much what I do with my life is look up restaurants I should go to. And then obviously pizza's a huge thing in New York, and I remembered that clip and I was like, oh, okay, I want to go to all those places eventually.
I loved it immediately. I remember thinking, I like pizza, I like to explore, and hey, maybe if I eat 8 slices of real New York pizza, I'll be that much closer to being a real New Yorker myself. I told that to Anthony and he said, hey, that's great, you're more than welcome to join in on the adventure. But
there's a snag.
That Jon Stewart clip is from 2011. We were eating at Denino's in 2021. 10 years and some very significant historical events later. You see, all those pizzerias shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic. One by one, as New York and the world started opening back up, the pizzerias opened their doors too. Except for one. At the beginning of this video, I told you that an employee at Lombardi's, the first New York pizzeria, was responsible for beginning the sale of pizza pies. That employee's name was Antonio Totonno Pero. About 20 years after Lombardi's opened, Totonno left the store to go open his own pizzeria on Coney Island, and he took his original recipe with him. So, while it is true that the oldest New York pizzeria is still operating on a corner in Little Italy, the oldest New York pizza is down on the shore next to the Cyclone and Wonder Wheel. Totonno's is currently owned by Antonio Pero's grandchildren, and they've been running it for decades. But for whatever reason, it still hasn't reopened its doors some 3 years after COVID's initial outbreak. I just started this journey, and I'd already hit a major roadblock. But still, I wanted to see if we could do it. I wanted to explore my city with Anthony and collect pieces of it, even if one of those pieces, the most original, most quintessential one, was beyond our reach.
Since the pandemic, this place has, at least on Google, has said that they're temporarily closed, so I don't know if, like, what the status is, if it'll ever open up, if they'll ever serve pizza again.
This is our 8-part journey across New York as we attempt to eat one slice of real New York pizza from each of the real New York pizza places that Jon Stewart ranted about back in 2011. The journey doesn't end until we try every pizza. The journey doesn't end until we eat them all.
Denino's, Lombardi's, Grimaldi's,
one by one,
Arturo's, John's,
down to the very
John's on the Upper West Side,
last
Joe's on Carmine Street,
slice.
Totonno's.
When the stars make it through, just like pasta fasul, that's amore. That's amore. Cause me, but you see, back in old Napoli, that's amore. Mambo Italiano, hey, hey, mambo Mambo Italiano.
Once Anthony got me hooked on this adventure, I started thinking seriously about New York pizza for the first time. Of course, I'd eaten a ton of it already. I'd lived in New York for years by that point, and pizza is everywhere. That was honestly the beauty of New York pizza to me. You never had to look for it, because it was always around. But now I was actually considering the quality. And even though I had 8 great recommendations from Jon Stewart, I was curious what else was even out there. And what separates real New York pizza from...
I'm gonna go get me a New York slice.
...the rest. So I started looking for an expert on New York pizza that I could interview for this video. But I ran into some trouble. My first idea was to talk to a pizza maker, a real pizza aiolo. But I was worried that if I asked any of them where the best New York pizza was, they would all just say their own restaurant. And most of them were too busy to talk to me anyway. Next, I thought about reaching out to a renowned chef or an esteemed food critic to interview. Arguably the most famous Italian chef in New York is Mario Batali. And well, in 2017...
Hey, Mambo Italiano.
And as for a pizza critic, if you look up pizza reviews for any spot, almost without fail, the first thing to come up is what Barstool Sports founder Dave Portnoy thinks about the pizza.
One bite, everybody knows the rules.
And when you look up Dave Portnoy...
Hey, Mambo Italiano.
Real quick, I just want to clarify that this bit is not to imply that all Italian Americans are perverts. That would, of course, be...
anti-Italian discrimination.
I also don't mean to imply that they're all mobsters. Anyway, I finally took a shot in the dark and just Googled New York pizza expert. And that's how I found Scott.
My name's Scott Wiener, and I do tours of pizzerias all around New York City.
Scott takes people on tours of New York pizza. He's been to hundreds of pizzerias. This guy knows his stuff.
He's the founder of Scott's Pizza Tours, runs the pizza-themed nonprofit Slice Out Hunger, and holds the Guinness World Record for largest collection of pizza boxes. Please welcome Scott Wiener!
Scott was kind enough to jump on the phone with me and answer some questions that I had about New York pizza. Would you mind, as much as it's possible, to define New York-style pizza for me?
New York-style pizza comes in a bunch of different varieties, but the one that most people are familiar with would be the second half of the 20th century New York style, which is pizza by the slice. Usually a gas-fired deck oven, 550 degrees. You got low moisture mozzarella from wall to wall, and a very simple tomato sauce. But besides that, it's just a big old 18 to 22 inch pie cut in 8 slices, served on paper plates, and you love it.
You said something interesting in there, which is this is the more recent definition of New York pizza. Can you talk to me about the original New York pizza?
When pizza came to America, it came directly from Naples, but they weren't making pizza the same way here because once they landed in New York, the wood-fired ovens and the wood to fuel them were just not available, especially when you're in a new place and you have no money. So everybody started building ovens that could burn the cheap fuel source, which was coal, and that began what still exists as coal-fired pizza. The style that still resonates in places like John's and Totonno's and Patsy's up in Harlem. You're not getting the way it was on day one, but none of us who are alive right now know what it was like on day one.
What do you think makes something New York pizza versus something like famous Familia that maybe isn't quite New York pizza?
I think it's the way that it's eaten, the attitude of the slice itself. It's got to be thin, flexible, foldable, portable. As soon as it becomes something that's sedentary, it's just not a New York slice. But I also think that there's such a thing as just bad New York style pizza. I'm not like naming names or anything, but there are some places that people argue about which are just, they're not that they're not New York style, they're just not that good. You could be both New York style and not good at the same time.
So, with a workable definition for New York pizza and a renewed appetite after talking about pizza with Scott for a half an hour, I headed out to get the next slice on the list. Lombardi's. By the time I joined him, Anthony had already been to a few of the pizza joints on Jon Stewart's list, including Lombardi's, so I was flying solo for this one. Like I said in part 1, Lombardi's is on a corner in Little Italy. It opened as America's first pizzeria in 1905 and has been serving New Yorkers ever since. If you didn't remember that, don't worry. They'll remind you. That message is plastered on every inch of their restaurant. I sat down and ordered their classic pizza, and I was surprised to find out that despite inventing the custom of selling pizza by the slice, Lombardi's no longer sells individual pizza slices. You have to order a whole pie. That was wild to me. Pizza by the slice is something I considered to be quintessential to the New York pizza style. But I had to get over that quickly, because I eventually discovered that only one of the pizza places on Jon Stewart's list sells individual slices. More on that later, though. And luckily it didn't matter for me at Lombardi's, because I was really hungry. The pizza came and it was okay. The sauce was fine, the cheese was good, but they took the idea of thin crust to an extreme, and the pizza was cooked to a crisp. It felt like I was eating a big, dry cracker, and it made the roof of my mouth hurt after a couple of slices. While I immediately recognized denino's as some of the best pizza I'd ever had in my life, Lombardi's was kinda disappointing. I felt like I'd had better New York pizza from random spots I'd passed on the street, but that might just be my taste. Either way, I ate my fill, and even though the pizza was a little crisp, I was still enjoying the fact that I got to eat it in the same building where American pizza was born. Okay, so it turns out that that's not exactly true. While I was researching Lombardi's history for this video, I came across some inconsistencies in their story. First off, Lombardi's actually closed down completely in 1984, before reopening 10 years later a few doors down from its original location. So that meant I wasn't actually sitting in the building from this famous photograph, and it meant that Lombardi's hasn't actually been open since 1905. So, Lombardi's is not the oldest continually operating pizzeria in America. That title now belongs to a pizzeria that opened in 1912, but that one's in New Jersey, so I'm not going to talk about it. This also means that now New York's oldest continually operating pizzeria is none other than Totonno's. In addition, there's some dispute about when Lombardi's actually opened. Hey, that guy looks familiar.
At first, it was this place called Pizzeria Napolitana, like the most boring name you can imagine. The only evidence we have of Gennaro Lombardi being the owner before 1918 is that one photograph where he's standing on the front steps with Totonno. Mm-hmm. The name doesn't really change until they buy the building in 1939 or 1940. It's likely that people called it Lombardi's before that, just because Lombardi was the guy who ran it. But it wasn't really called Lombardi's until 1940. But Lombardi's has an amazing history. It's older than the history that they claim. So they claim to have opened in 1905, when in reality, the pizzeria that became Lombardi's eventually opened in 1898.
So, despite all of their wall art, Scott claims that Lombardi's did not, in fact, open in 1905. Although, others have suggested that 1905 is the year that Lombardi's got their official pizzeria license from the city, not when they actually started making pizza. To add insult to injury, Lombardi's recently lost its original brick oven for making coal-fired pizzas. The oven was a casualty of COVID's impact on sales. Now, Lombardi's makes all of its pizzas in a modern gas oven.
One thing Lombardi's does have going for it is that it was reopened by Gennaro Lombardi's grandson, Gennaro Lombardi III. That family connection helps tie the historic pizzeria back to its origins. To reopen his grandfather's historic pizzeria, Gennaro III partnered with his childhood friend John Brescio, who...
Hey, Mambo Italiano.
Never mind, Lombardi's totally opened in 1905 and the pizza there was the best I've ever had. You should all go there right now and leave a big old tip. In all seriousness, I wish that Lombardi's would help verify and embrace this new information, because it means that their history stretches even farther back than 1905. And that's worth celebrating, even if it means replacing all of their decorations. But no matter the specifics, we owe a lot to Lombardi's, and it absolutely deserves its station in New York's pizza pantheon. It's still an undeniable fact that Lombardi's Pizzeria is our oldest surviving link to the first pizza ever made in America, and by extension, so is the pizza at Totonno's, which, by the way, still wasn't showing any signs of life.
Mambo Italiano.
Next up on Jon Stewart's list was Grimaldi's, and this place has a ton of history, so I'm just gonna dive right in. I said before that New York's pizza history is filled with bad blood, and parts of it really are reminiscent of a turf war straight out of a mafia movie. This is one of those parts. Oh, and just a warning, Grimaldi's history also has a ton of repeated names, so do your best to keep up. Before we talk about Grimaldi's, we have to talk about Patsy's. Patsy's Pizzeria isn't on Jon Stewart's list, but it is absolutely of the same caliber. It's one of only 3 surviving pizza places, along with John's and Totonno's, that can directly trace its origin back to Lombardi's. In 1933, an Italian immigrant named Pasquale Patsy Lancieri, who reportedly learned how to make pizzas at Lombardi's, opened up his own pizzeria in East Harlem, which at the time was home to an even bigger Italian neighborhood than the Little Italy that's still downtown today. Patsy had a sister, Giuliana, and Giuliana married a man with the last name Grimaldi. Giuliana and Grimaldi had a son that they named Patsy, perhaps after the child's pizza-making uncle. When little Patsy Grimaldi was old enough, he went to go learn how to make pizzas at his Uncle Patsy's Pizzeria, which, by the way, is still there at 1st Avenue and 118th Street. Okay, 50 years later, in 1990, little Patsy Grimaldi, who was about 60 years old by then, decided to open up his own separate pizza restaurant out in Brooklyn at 19 Old Fulton Street, right under the Brooklyn Bridge, and he called it Patsy's. It's unclear whether he had permission to do this. Either way, little Patsy Grimaldi was definitely riding off the coattails of his Uncle Patsy. Uncle Patsy Lancieri passed away sometime in the 70s, but his widow, Carmela Lancieri, was still alive when Grimaldi opened up his totally separate Patsy's Pizza in Brooklyn in 1990. Aunt Carmela didn't do anything directly about her nephew copying the Patsy's name, but a year after Grimaldi opened his shop under the Brooklyn Bridge, Carmela sold the original Patsy's to some longtime employees, including a man named Frank Bria, who still owns the Patsy's brand today. Now, while Aunt Carmela may have been cool with Grimaldi using the Patsy name, Frank Bria absolutely was not. Frank sued Grimaldi in 1996 over the name. Basically, Frank said, "Hey, if you want to keep calling yourself Patsy's, that's fine, but you have to pay me for the rights." And Grimaldi, under the pressure of any pushback whatsoever, said, "Nah, not worth it," and changed the name of his pizzeria to Patsy Grimaldi's. It's unclear exactly when the name changed from Patsy Grimaldi's to just Grimaldi's, but my bet is that it happened in 1998. That's the year that good old Patsy Grimaldi retired and sold the store at 19 Old Fulton Street to a new owner, Frank Scioli. Different Frank. I'm guessing that Frank Bria continued to put pressure on Frank Scioli to remove the word Patsy from the restaurant's name, and Scioli cared more about the Grimaldi part of the name anyway. I'm just speculating. Either way, the name changed and Scioli found success in franchising Grimaldi's, and there are now 46 Grimaldi's locations across the United States. Despite their aggressive brand expansion, the next 13 years were actually pretty tumultuous for Grimaldi's original location and its new management. By early 2011, they were in a pretty nasty court battle with their landlord who wanted to evict the restaurant from the building. Scioli decided the hell with it and began renovating the empty bank that was literally next door into a new home for the beloved pizza shop, complete with a brand new brick oven and everything. A few months later, Comedy Central aired an episode of The Daily Show during which Jon Stewart told people to go eat at Grimaldi's, and he showed a picture of the storefront at 19 Old Fulton Street. That was on June 1st, 2011. The original Grimaldi's location closed on November 29th, 2011. The new location next door, at 1 Front Street, opened the very next day. That means that anyone who saw Jon Stewart's New York Pizza Rant when it originally aired had just under 6 months to follow his recommendation and eat at the Grimaldi's that he mentioned on his show, at least in the strictest sense. So, here is where I admit to you that no matter if Totonno's ever opens or not, Anthony and I will technically never be able to accomplish our goal of eating at every pizzeria on Jon Stewart's list. We were over 10 years too late to eat at the Grimaldi's pictured in the rant. And there's nothing we can do about that. But the location at 1 Front Street is still alive and well, and it's literally as close to the original as you can get. Anthony had already been to Grimaldi's, so one day I went with a few other friends to check it off the list. And even though the pizzeria was in a different spot, I was still excited to see the empty building next door where Grimaldi's used to be. Wait, what the hell? Okay, so here's what happened. Patsy did sell Grimaldi's to Frank Scioli in 1998, but he also stuck around to help teach the staff how to cook pizzas and to monitor the overall quality of the pies that they were selling. Frank Scioli was a businessman after all, not a chef. Well, Patsy guided, some say barked at, the staff for a few years, but at a certain point after Scioli paid off the restaurant, he asked old Patsy to stop coming by. It's not for me to say who was in the wrong there, but the result was that the relationship between the founder and the owner of Grimaldi's Pizza became strained. So, when 2010 came along and Scioli entered into a court battle with the building's owners, Patsy was following the story pretty closely. When Scioli moved Grimaldi's to the bank next door in November 2011, Patsy, who still had a great relationship with his old landlord, looked at the empty husk of his old pizzeria and saw an opportunity. 1 year later, in 2012, Patsy Grimaldi opened a pizzeria at 19 Old Fulton Street for the second time in his life. This time, at age 81. Unable to call it Patsy's or Grimaldi's, he decided to name it after his mother, Juliana. And, as of today, it's still in business right next door to Grimaldi's. If you're wondering if that move pissed off Frank Scioli, the answer is yeah, of course it did. It was a cold move.
Revenge is a dish best served cold, Jack. Like sashimi or pizza.
You prefer cold pizza?
The morning after? It's the best.
Better than hot pizza? That's insane.
You don't tell me what kind of pizza to like.
Made even colder by the fact that Scioli's 39-year-old son suddenly and tragically passed away, just around the time that they had moved Grimaldi's next door. Patsy attended the wake, and then continued right on with his plan of opening Juliana's, a move that would no doubt create competition for an already struggling Grimaldi's.
Hey, Mambo Italiano.
Scioli's stepdaughter, Gina Peluso, who currently runs the flagship Grimaldi's location under the Brooklyn Bridge, couldn't believe Patsy's audacity, and was quoted as saying, "It's like a Sopranos episode. You come in, shake their hands, and then you shoot them in the head the next day." Scioli tried to stop Juliana's from opening, and he tried to sue Patsy when it eventually did. His attempts were ultimately in vain, and despite the bad blood, both pizzerias are open and thriving today. And hey, I don't have any stake in this pizza war. My friends and I changed plans and stopped in at Juliana's first. We got a classic margarita pizza, and it was fantastic. Thin, rich crust, sweet, luscious sauce, a really great bite of pizza, and a very welcome surprise. Patsy may have pissed some people off during his colorful career, but man, can he make a pizza. After Juliana's, we were still hungry, and since our moms didn't raise us as quitters, we waited for another pizza, this time from Grimaldi's. Jon Stewart was not joking about the line. Since it was a nice day, we grabbed this pizza to go and we made our way down to the park under the Brooklyn Bridge. Grimaldi's pizza was great. It was really similar to Juliana's. Thin crust with a nice char just like you want. The sauce was a little more tart and the cheese was maybe a tad less flavorful than Juliana's, but it was a close call. Technically, I didn't eat at the Grimaldi's pictured in Jon Stewart's rant, but I did eat a slice from Grimaldi's new location next door, and I ate a slice from Patsy Grimaldi himself in his original storefront location, which I think is even better anyway. Afterwards, I asked Anthony if he knew about Juliana's. He told me, yeah, it's got a wild story behind it. Turf wars and bad blood aside, the lesson I'm taking away from this one is that legendary pizzerias do sometimes come back, and it's worth holding out hope that Totonno's might come back too. Right?
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today.
New York originally belonged to the indigenous Lenape people. They used this land to fish and hunt and gather supplies. It's from them that we get the name Manhattan, which is an anglicized version of their phrase, the place where we gather wood for bows. Also, we still use one of their old hunting trails, only now we call it Broadway. About 500 years ago, the first European landed in what we now call New York Harbor. He was an Italian explorer named Giovanni da Verrazzano. We named the Verrazzano Bridge after him. In 1609, another explorer, Henry Hudson, for whom the Hudson River is named, rediscovered the Lenape land and claimed it for the country that hired him to explore, the Netherlands. And in 1625, the Dutch established it as their colony and called it New Amsterdam. 40 years after that, the Dutch surrendered the colony to the English, who renamed it New York after James Stewart, who at the time was England's Duke of York. The settlement remained under English rule until the American Revolution, and it has been part of the United States ever since. Over the next 250 years, New York developed into one of the world's most active trading ports and welcomed immigrants from all over the globe. Today, it's an amazing cultural crossroads that symbolizes the eternal, ethereal promise of the American dream. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. When Anthony and I moved here in 2016, we discovered that despite its history as a safe port for the huddled masses, this city is not always the most welcoming place.
Oh, there is nothing like New York in the spring.
Don't get me wrong, the people are actually very nice. Granted, they aren't in a hurry or you're not in their way. And there's obviously a lot to see here and a lot to explore, and there's a lot to love.
Oh, that word bums me out unless it's between the words meat and pizza.
But it really can be hard to live here. It's extremely expensive, it's smelly and dirty, it can be really hard to get around or to do laundry or to get more than 2 bags of groceries up to your 4th floor walk-up apartment in just one trip. As much as I love it here, it feels like for every opportunity New York has given me, it's also taken something away. This quote from Men in Black 3 sums up my feelings on New York pretty well.
It's a gigantic pain in the ass, but it has its moments.
One of those moments for me was eating at Arturo's. Anthony hadn't been there yet, so for the first time since Denino's, we headed out for pizza together. Arturo's was started in 1957 by a second-generation Italian-American named Arthur Guinta, but everyone called him Arturo. It opened on McDougal Street, but it moved to the corner of Houston and Thompson a few years later, where it still stands today. It was an instant hit as a Greenwich Village haunt, and it's hosted thousands of bands and acts in its nearly 70-year run. They still have live jazz music almost every day. The first thing we noticed when we got there was that the walls are absolutely plastered in art and celebrity photos. It had a uniquely New York charm to it that no other place on our journey had had so far, at least from my perspective. One of my favorite parts of New York in general is how weird everything is allowed to be here. This city is home to millions of individuals who express themselves in all kinds of unpredictable ways. Walking into Arturo's really felt like we had found a place that was truly one of a kind. Unlike Lombardi's or Grimaldi's, it wasn't advertising itself, it was just being itself. We ordered a half-cheese, half-pepperoni pizza, and ate while we admired all of the wall art. This pizza ruled. Easily my favorite slice from Jon Stewart's list so far. Maybe my favorite New York pizza, period. Its crust was slightly thicker and more hearty than all the other slices I'd had so far, while still being crisp from the coal oven. It was packed with flavor, and it had a perfect cheese-to-sauce ratio. I couldn't believe I hadn't heard of this place before. I especially couldn't believe it, because while we were eating, Anthony and I both realized that at some point in our 7 years of living in New York, we had each worked at jobs less than 5 blocks away from Arturo's, and just never noticed it. I think sometimes it's easy to get distracted and miss things, even if they're right in front of you all along. While we were on this journey, a lot of things happened in the New York pizza world. First, Domenico DeMarco, the owner and pizza maker of another renowned pizzeria, DeFara Pizza, passed away after almost 60 years of making some of the best pizza in the city. DeMarco handmade every single pie at DeFara, which meant the line was often hours long, and it also meant that if he wasn't working, the shop wasn't open. So when he passed away last year, a lot of people were worried that the pizzeria would go away too. As it turns out, DeFara's is still open today. It's run by DeMarco's daughter and family. They've actually expanded to some new locations as well. But that's not always the case. Sometimes restaurant owners would rather see their beloved eateries die than turn them over to new operators. That's what happened to Lenny's Pizza earlier this year when owner Frank Giordano retired. The pizza shop of Saturday Night Fever fame closed instead of sold, and now it's gone for good. I was lucky enough to get to eat a slice of DeFara pizza that was personally prepared by Domenico DeMarco. But I never made it to Lenny's, and now I never will. Like I said, for every opportunity New York gives you, it also takes one away. I'm bummed to have missed out on an iconic slice of New York pizza, but at least it wasn't on Jon Stewart's list, and it wasn't a part of this journey. And for the time being, I was choosing to focus on how great Arturo's was, and on the rest of the pizza journey. But a few days later, Anthony sent me a text. I raced over to Google, heart pounding, hoping against hope that New York was about to give me an opportunity, and not, as I feared, about to take one away.
Come on, come through, New York, New York.
Even though it looked like Totonno's was closed forever, Anthony and I were still determined to get through the rest of Jon Stewart's list. Although, now that it looked like we weren't going to be able to finish it, I started trying to poke some holes in the challenge. Like, I started wondering, why does Jon Stewart get to be the end-all be-all of New York pizza opinions? Sure, he's ranted about it a lot, but he's just one guy, and just like me, he's not even from New York. There is no question that the 8 pizzerias on Jon Stewart's list are elite, but there are absolutely other pizza places that deserve to represent New York pizza at its best. I've already talked about a few of them, like Patsy's, Giuliana's, and DeFara's, and there are other opinions that we can and should take into consideration. For instance, Ben Stiller, a real native New Yorker, recently named some of his favorite New York pizzerias on an episode of Jimmy Kimmel.
What's the best place to get a pizza in New York?
Okay, that's a good one.
That's a dangerous question.
I'm gonna have to say either Lucali. Yeah. Or maybe F&F.
Great.
Or DeFara's, or maybe I don't know, Paulie G's, or L&B. L&B.
What are you talking about? I overheard some New York pizza misinformation. The answer is John's on Bleecker for the best pie.
But without a doubt, one opinion that does not deserve any merit is Donald Trump's. Before he was president, Trump was heralded as one of the most quintessential New Yorkers, if not the New Yorker himself. He capitalized off of that archetype in a number of ways.
I had a great faith in New York. Primarily our purchases have been in New York.
Samantha, a cosmopolitan, and Donald Trump. You just don't get more New York than that.
Excuse me, where's the lobby?
Down the hall and to the left.
Thanks.
But maybe his favorite way to make money off of his New Yorker image was showing up in pizza commercials.
$9.99. They've got to be losing money on this.
You give me those 3 pizzas, only I'll give you just $5 a piece.
Introducing stuffed crust pizza from Pizza Hut.
We eat our pizza the wrong way.
Crust first.
He was in so many pizza commercials that Saturday Night Live made a parody of it.
Say cheese, burger, pizza, only from Dominios.
And cuts.
It seems to me that someone who presents himself so often and so aggressively as both an ambassador to New York and an authority on pizza should be held to a higher standard when representing both. So when Jon Stewart attacked Donald Trump in 2011 for bringing Sarah Palin to famous Familia, Trump really deserved it. Besides picking a lowbrow slice of pizza to represent New York, Trump committed a few other pizza crimes while he was at famous Familia.
Eating pizza with a knife and fork?
And before anyone starts pointing fingers about this being politically motivated, here's a Democrat, also tasked with representing New York City, committing the same pizza sin.
The mayor is eating his pizza with a knife and a fork. De Blasio, you son of a bitch.
And lastly, at Trump's infamous trip to famous Familia, he did one more thing.
And you stack your slices, Donald?
Now, while that's certainly not how I like to eat pizza, and also not how I recommend that you eat pizza, I have to call shenanigans on Jon Stewart a little bit. Because another famous New Yorker also once stacked his slices. But this counter-argument actually lost a little bit of steam for me when I found out how Lenny's owner Frank Giordano eats pizza. Although, while he was criticizing Trump's use of a fork and knife.
You fold it like this, you pay, baby.
Just kidding, we love you, Frank. Hope you're enjoying retirement, buddy. Trump actually responded to all of the fork and knife backlash at the time. Or at least he tried his best.
A lot of people are asking about why am I using plastic forks and knives. Frankly, it was very comfortable. Plus, this way you can take the top of the pizza off. You're not just eating the crust. I like not to eat the crust.
Now that's weird because I have it from a very reliable source that not only does Trump really like the crust, but he even prefers to eat his pizza
crust first.
I reached out to Donald Trump to request an interview for this video. I genuinely wanted to ask him about his opinions on New York pizza without a corporate sponsor tipping the scales. But he never got back to me. I guess he was busy.
Former President Donald Trump facing charges in a 4th criminal case.
Anyway, if all of that isn't enough reason to disregard Trump's pizza opinions entirely, I think it's fair to ignore the takes of anyone who has a full Wikipedia page devoted to their sexual misconduct.
Hey, Mambo Italiano.
So, for the time being, we kept following Jon Stewart's advice and went to his favorite New York pizzeria, John's of Bleecker Street. John's was founded in 1929 by Giovanni John Sasso, an Italian immigrant who supposedly learned how to make pizzas at Lombardi's. In 1934, Sasso moved his coal oven from its original location on Sullivan Street over to its new home on Bleecker Street, where it's been ever since. After Lombardi's and Totonno's, Jon's is the third oldest pizzeria in New York. Ownership has changed hands a few times since then, and now it is co-owned by two longtime employees, Bob Vittoria and Pete Castellotti Sr. Pete is the one who's responsible for turning Jon's into a chain, but I'll talk more about that in the next part. Jon's was awesome. It was packed with people and was plastered from floor to ceiling with colorful art and celebrity photos. The walls and booths are carved up with decades of patrons' graffiti. It really felt like a solidified piece of the city. We got a couple pies, including their original Sasso pizza, which was phenomenal. The crust was perfectly charred, but not too crisp that it was crunchy. The sauce was slightly acidic, less sweet than the other places, but really good. I personally liked it just a little less than Arturo's, but I prefer a thicker crust. Jon's at Bleecker really lived up to the hype for me. The atmosphere was extremely fun, and the pizza really did taste like a quintessential New York slice. Thanks for the Jon's rec, Jon.
Know what the country's coming to, but in Rome do as the Romans do.
A few weeks after we went to Jon's, we took a trip down to Coney Island to watch a Cyclones game. Google still said that Totonno's was permanently closed, but we'd already made the trek all the way down there, and we wanted to do our due diligence. So we walked a few blocks out of the way, just to see if Totonno's was really closed for good.
On top of spaghetti, all covered with cheese.
Hey, at least we checked. Once we were at the game, I went to look for a slice of pizza. But even the stand at the stadium was closed. I honestly don't remember if we won or lost the game. We were there for Bring Your Dog Night, and they had us sitting behind the outfield. So it was kind of hard to see anything. It was starting to feel like the whole night had been a bust. And I was craving pizza more than I think I ever had in my entire life. After the game, we walked along the boardwalk, and I kept my eyes peeled for a place where I could get a slice of pizza. Truly any pizza would do. And while I did eventually find a place, I refused to buy a slice. Part of the reason I'd always wanted to be a New Yorker is because I grew up watching my favorite heroes save this city. Spider-Man, the Men in Black, the Ninja Turtles. Obviously, by the time I moved here, I understood that those heroes weren't a real part of New York. But I realized something else once I got here. This city doesn't need to be saved. It can take care of itself. New Yorkers have a stereotype of being busy and mean, and I really, truly have not found that to be the case. They're busy and nice. Sure, they won't just nod hello to you on the street like they do in the Midwest. Everyone here has places to be. But if you're lost, you can ask any one of them for help navigating the subway or which way 7th Avenue is, and 99 times out of 100, they will stop what they're doing and lend a hand. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen someone fall in this city, but I can tell you that every single time I've seen it happen, people always rush in to help them back up. And this time, it was me falling. Except I didn't fall down on the street. While researching the next place on Jon Stewart's list, Jon's on the Upper West Side, I fell down a rabbit hole. Follow me in. I said in the last part that one of the co-owners of Jon's of Bleecker Street, Pete Castellotti Sr., turned Jon's into a chain. He did, that's true. And he did it with the help of his wife, Madeline, and his children, Lisa and Pete Jr., which has to mean that the Jon's empire is a nice family business.
As long as we got each other.
Right? The Castellottis have been at each other's throats since the 1970s. Pete Sr. and his wife Madeline separated in 1976. It's unclear whether or not they ever actually got divorced, but Pete moved down to Florida while Madeline stayed in the city. I'd call that pretty broken up. The pair still partnered up to open 2 new John's locations in the 80s, John's on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and John's of New York, an Italian restaurant down in Port Charlotte, Florida. Their son, Pete Jr., was tasked with managing the flagship Bleecker Street location, while their daughter Lisa went to manage the new Upper East Side location. In 1993, the family opened another location, this one on West 65th Street. Jon Stewart would name it 18 years later during his pizza rant, John's on the Upper West Side. In 1997, Madeline decided to open her own John's location, the biggest of them all, on 44th Street in the heart of Times Square. For reasons I'm not exactly clear on, John's of Times Square is a completely separate, unrelated business than John's of Bleecker Street. Today, the restaurants coexist in a semi-rivalry, semi-truce type deal, which to me
mirrors Pete and Madeline's dynamic.
There are small but important differences scattered throughout the locations. You can decide for yourself if you prefer the slogan "no slices" or "whole pies" better. I know I've made my choice. Anyway, Madeline ran her dream Times Square location for 7 years until her untimely death in 2004.
Before she passed, Madeline named her daughter Lisa as her sole beneficiary. According to the New York Post, which for the record is not a very reliable source, Madeline did this to keep any inheritance out of the hands of Pete Jr.'s wife, who Madeline reportedly hated.
This meant that all Madeline's money and assets, including the Times Square location, went to her daughter Lisa.
It doesn't even make any sense! I'm the youngest boy!
Another version of the story is that Pete Jr. asked his mom to put everything in his sister's name in order to keep it from falling into his soon-to-be ex-wife's pockets. But after Madeline passed away and Pete's divorce was finalized, Lisa refused to split the inheritance with her brother. Whatever the specifics were, Pete Jr. sued his sister Lisa for $25 million. That lawsuit is still going on. And later, Pete Sr. sued Lisa along with Madeline's estate to get his piece of her pie too. You know, family stuff.
It makes us look like a dysfunctional family.
Pete Sr. is currently 82 and still going strong. But unfortunately, not all of the John's locations are as lucky. In 2014, the Upper East Side location closed up shop for unclear reasons, but I doubt the family infighting helped. And unfortunately for me and Anthony, the Upper West Side location is gone too. We had technically already failed to get pizza from the Grimaldi's pizzeria shown in Jon Stewart's rant, although we did our best. And by this point, we had come to terms with the fact that we would never get Totonno's either. But for some reason, this one really stung. Now, here's where I really fell into the rabbit hole. Because I had a hunch about something. And if I was right, it wouldn't matter that this particular pizzeria was closed. Hear me out. While we know exactly when all of the John's locations opened, and we know exactly when the Upper East Side spot closed, no one can give me a straight answer about when the Upper West Side location closed. My last fleeting hope for this slice was to try and prove that the Upper West Side location closed before 2011, when Jon Stewart's rant aired. I hoped, that somehow Jon had gotten his facts wrong and listed a pizzeria in his rant that, unbeknownst to him, was already closed. If that was the case, it would have been impossible from the get-go to complete this list. We could call this slice a mistrial and cross it off the list without failing the challenge. Game on. First, I emailed Scott. He told me that it closed down a couple years before I moved to New York, so after the rant aired. The information was far from definitive, but if it was true, that was game over. I wanted a second opinion. Someone from the Times Square location told me that it closed in 2000, which is a different year than Scott said, and more importantly, that was before the rant. I liked this answer better. But, unfortunately, without hard evidence, I was in the middle of a classic you say tomato, I say tomato situation. Deeper into this rabbit hole we go. The building where John's Upper West Side used to live is now home to a restaurant called the Atlantic Grill, which on its storefront boasts an opening date of 1998. But, following a lead I found on Wikipedia, it's unclear if that date is for this West 65th Street location or for another Atlantic Grill location on the Upper East Side. I called them up and no one at the Atlantic Grill knew when it opened. The restaurant had been sold to a new hospitality group in 2021, and they had cleaned house and hired all new employees. I emailed the original owner and a lead from the old restaurant group, but they never responded to my inquiries. I kept digging. My new goal was to collect any and all evidence that John's Upper West Side had left behind and assemble a timeline. This was really hard. John's Upper West Side location vanished almost without a trace, but besides Jon Stewart naming it in his rant, there is some more solid evidence that it did indeed exist. First, this New York Times article from the week it opened, dated June 23rd, 1993. Next, another New York Times article, this one from 1995, mentioning John's in the present tense. June 19th, 1997, a press release from then NYC Mayor Rudy Giuliani's office, confirming the Upper West Side location was still there. September 26th, 1999, a John's mention in another Times article about good New York eats. And then, for over a decade, nothing. Finally, I found this single archived snapshot from a travel guide site dated April 8th, 2013. This one confirmed that the location was closed. There was an enormous window between the last evidence I could find that John's was open and the first evidence I could find that it was closed. And unfortunately, both dates I was given from sources close to John's fit within that window. My research was inconclusive. After exhausting Google's results, I dove into New York City's public records. The address for John's Upper West Side was 48 West 65th Street. I found the building, searched through its old construction records, and found 2 permits from January 2001 to install a couple front awnings on the building, reading 48 and John's Pizzeria.
You don't put new awnings on a closed business.
However, the work permits stop in August 2001. I searched the block and discovered that the lot for 48 West 65th Street is now listed as obsolete. And there's no listing for 50 West 65th Street, where the Atlantic Grill is today. But that building runs all the way through the block, and its 64th Street number is 43. That address has permits dating back to 1990 and going all the way up through 2020, with a lot of work going on starting around 2002. But again, nothing conclusive or specific to John's. Stuck in a dead end, I did something I hadn't thought to do before. I had searched for info on 48 and 50 West 65th Street, but I had never Googled 49 West 65th Street. It led me to this Eater article, revealing the Atlantic Grill's opening date.
September 3rd, 2010.
Holy shit. It all lined up with the city's records. And if the Atlantic Grill really did open in 2010, then the John's on the Upper West Side would have to have closed before that. I was 99% sure I had proven that Jon Stewart's rant aired after that John's location closed, but I wanted to hear the information straight from the source. So I emailed the writer of the article. She never got back to me. Maybe because she is now the editor-in-chief of Eater? Hell yeah. And she's too busy to solve pizza mysteries. But I was mostly content anyway. Mostly. Even though I now knew that the Atlantic Grill was open before 2011, I still didn't know when John's Upper West Side closed. I had a 9-year window. I couldn't let it go. I kept digging, and on my millionth Google search, I found this post by an artist who painted murals inside John's Upper West Side, Doug Cooper, a professor of architecture. I had finally found someone who had been there. I reached out to Doug, and for the first time while I was solving this mystery, someone got back to me. So first, I'm just curious if you, off the bat, if you know when it closed.
I think it was around 2000, and I'm going to say 4 or 5, something like that. The guy who would know is the architect who did the design for John's 65th Street.
Oh.
And that's Andy Tesoro. I'll send you his contact information, and then you could get the exact date.
I immediately followed Doug's lead and called up the authority on the building that used to house John's on the Upper West Side.
I am Andrew Tesoro. I was the architect for John's Pizza at 48 West 65th Street.
Do you know when the John's on 65th Street opened and closed?
I know exactly when it opened. It was early 1993. It thrived immediately. There were lines halfway down the block. It was a spectacularly successful installation. The 65th Street store was in peril because the building had been sold in 1999. Now they had a new landlord who wanted to convert it to a residential building. So the developers started taking action to kick them out. They argued they wanted to stay there, they were doing well, but apparently their lease provided for this eventuality. And in around 2003, or perhaps it was 2002, they closed. I am uncertain of the exact date.
So, last question. Can you just confirm for me that 2003 was before 2011?
Yes.
Pizza mystery solved. Mostly. But if the architect himself doesn't even know the exact closing date, I don't think anyone does. So that was that. With proof that The Daily Show had gotten its facts wrong, we were able to cross John's on the Upper West Side off of the list without failing the challenge. But even though we'd solved a decades-old New York pizza mystery, it kind of felt like a hollow victory. We still wanted to get 8 slices of real New York pizza, and now we were not only 1, but 2 slices short. With the loss of Totonno's and now John's on the Upper West Side, Joe's on Carmine Street was the only surviving pizzeria left on Jon Stewart's list that Anthony and I hadn't been to yet. It was time for us to cut our losses and finish this thing. Or at least let it end, knowing we tried our best. Except, while I was working on this video and reviewing the rant for the 100th time, I noticed something. It's the thing that sparked my hunch that the John's on the Upper West Side might have closed before 2011 and led me down the rabbit hole in the first place. Kudos to you if you caught it before me. Here's a freeze frame. That is not a picture of the John's Upper West Side location. That is a picture of the John's in Times Square, which still totally exists. Anthony and I raced to Times Square and nabbed a table at the biggest pizzeria I've ever been to. Like most places in Times Square, I found it to be really kitschy. Knickknacks everywhere, overcrowded, a little dirty. But Doug's mural of New York was stunning, and my favorite part was the skylight, which was very reminiscent of an 8-slice pizza pie. I found out later that that was actually part of Madeline Castellotti's inspiration for converting this space into a pizzeria. Despite the fact that we were clearly in a tourist trap, they had a real coal oven. They had 4, actually, and that wasn't nothing. We ordered a classic cheese, and it was disappointing. Especially coming off the back of the original John's on Bleecker. As excited as we were to learn that this place was still here, the pizza itself was really a letdown. It was the blandest slice I'd had yet by far. The dough was soft and undercooked, hardly any char. The sauce and the cheese were nothing to write home about. It felt completely out of league from the other slices. But still, we came hungry and we ate our fill. After we paid, we left and headed for the subway. But before we got there, we passed something just around the corner from John's that made us stop. We figured why not. Famous Familia is a chain of pizzerias started in 1986 by 3 Albanian immigrants, brothers Paul, John, and Giorgio Kolaj. Over the last 36 years, they have expanded to over 20 locations, including 8 that are still open in New York City. Just like John's on the Upper West Side, the Famous Familia location featured in Jon Stewart's rant is no longer around. But this one is, and it seems to have inherited a lot of the old decorations from the location where Donald Trump took Sarah Palin. We were curious, so we ducked in, got a few slices, and figured that, when in Rome, we should do as the Romans do. Honestly, it wasn't as bad as I was expecting. It wasn't even bad. It wasn't great. I probably wouldn't even call it good, but it was fine. If you're in a rush or on a budget and you want a slice, Famous Familia will get the job done. As Scott says,
you could be both New York style and not good at the same time.
Honestly, my biggest takeaway wasn't how good or bad Famous Familia was. It was how poorly John's of Times Square stacked up. The John's pizza we ate that night was better than Famous Familia, but not by much. These pizzerias should have been miles apart, but they had a lot in common. The pizza was pretty bland, they both prioritized quantity over quality, and they had one last very important thing in common. I came away with a higher opinion of Famous Familia than I'd ever had. Everything that knocked John's of Times Square down for me actually helped to pick Famous Familia up. After all, it's a business started by immigrants. They weren't from Italy, but just like Lombardi and Totonno, they worked hard for their slice of the American dream. And they'd earned it. So, say what you will. Even though Anthony and I couldn't eat at John's on the Upper West Side, we still ate at another pizzeria featured in Jon Stewart's rant. 2, actually. We'd been knocked down, but we had picked ourselves back up. We didn't even need a hero. But we ended up finding one anyway. One day, Anthony sent me an Instagram story that had been posted by a New York foodie he follows called Noshing NYC. She was eating at Totonno's.
Magnifico, or maybe spaghetti. Hey, you suppers are ready. Now where you go? Mamma mia, bambino. Mamma mia, bambino. Samarayo, samarayo, samarayo. You should have tasted my lasagna.
By this point, it had been almost 2 years since I joined Anthony on this pizza journey back at Denino's, and I'd eaten a lot of pizza in that time. I'd had great pizza, terrible pizza, and a lot of pizza that was just okay. But despite it all, not one of those slices was the pizza I really wanted. And suddenly, that slice was back on the table. As soon as Anthony sent me that Instagram post featuring a foodie going to town on some very real, very fresh Totonno's pizza in front of a very open Totonno's storefront, several questions raced through my mind. Questions like, what the hell, and how the f***? Anthony and I immediately went to Google for answers. First, we found that the Google status had been changed back to temporarily closed. Holy shit. And second, we found this article, saying that Totonno's was working on pivoting to a delivery system. Now, we'd heard this story before. There was an Eater article promising the same thing over a year and a half earlier. And hey, still no Totonno's. But then how did Noshing NYC get her hands on a slice? I messaged the owner of the account, Michelle, to ask her a very nice version of, how the hell did you do that? And she kindly responded with a very simple, they literally just gave it to me. It was hard to tell exactly what was going on in there, but we did know one thing. Someone at Totonno's was making pizzas again.
Hey, you a pass a lasagna.
While we waited for news about Totonno's delivery system, we went to knock off the only other pizzeria left on the list, Joe's on Carmine Street. Joe's Pizza was started in 1975 by Joe Pizzoli, an immigrant straight from Naples, Italy. He opened the original location in Greenwich Village on the corner of Bleecker and Carmine Streets, and now has 5 locations spread throughout the city, plus one in Michigan and another in Florida. Joe's Pizza has won New York's Best Pizza Awards from Food Network and USA Today, and it regularly finds a spot on the New York Times list of top 10 New York pizza places. You also might recognize Joe's from its cameo in Spider-Man 2.
8 extra large deep dish pizzas. In 8 minutes, I am defaulting on Joe's 29-minute guarantee.
If you didn't recognize it immediately, don't worry. They have a poster hanging up in every single Joe's location reminding you that they were in Spider-Man 2. But it actually turns out that none of the current Joe's locations was the one that was featured in Spider-Man. That Joe's was the original location on Bleecker and Carmine. And that location closed in 2005, 1 year after Spider-Man 2 came out. But it later reopened a few doors down on Carmine Street, where it still stands today. And for those keeping track, where it was back in 2011 when Jon Stewart's Rant aired. So this is all kosher. Joe's was the first and only pizzeria on Jon Stewart's list to sell pizza by the slice, which is still the most common way that pizza is sold in the city. And it is still my favorite way to enjoy New York pizza. Anthony and I each ate a slice in the shop, and then grabbed a few to go. We were going to head back to his place to get drunk and watch our annual viewing of The Departed.
I'm not a cop.
That's a story for another day, but the pizza was great. Super rich, stringy cheese, sweet and tangy sauce, big slices that will fill you up. The crust was softer and had less char than every other pizza on the list, but that's likely because of the gas ovens. It's still legal to install coal-powered brick ovens in New York, but it's expensive and there's a lot of red tape to get through first. So, in almost every pizzeria in the city, you'll find gas ovens, not coal. I think that's part of why all the other pizzerias are on Jon Stewart's list. Besides Lombardi's, which used to have one, and Denino's, the others all have coal ovens, which are really rare. That helps them stand out and helps tie them back to the original pizza recipes brought over from Naples. It ties them to tradition. But Joe Pizzoli also came here from Naples, and it doesn't get more traditional than that. Joe's Pizza feels like it's on this list as the representative for 99% of New York pizza. The everyman pizza. It's the best modern version of gas oven New York pizza by the slice. And it really is that good. It deserves its place on the list. If you're in New York and you want to go out of your way for a really good slice, and just one slice, my recommendation for you, go to Joe's. With Joe's on Carmine down the hatch, we only had one slice left to get. We turned all our attention to Totonno's. I messaged the owners asking to interview them for this video. I was curious about their story. Why had they closed their restaurant in the first place? Why had they stayed closed so long after the city reopened? And why were they making pizza again now? Plus, as the most important pizzeria on the journey, I wanted to hear their history straight from the source. My ulterior motive was to try and get some pizza. I sent in my request, and then the only thing left for us to do was wait. Wait for an answer about the interview. Wait for more news about this supposed delivery system. Wait for anything at all. So we waited. And waited. And waited. But no news came.
I do have a theory that, like, some of my favorite pizza places that I think taste the best also correlate with having had the longest waits, which might make sense because you're like, oh, it's the best, so the most people come. But because you have to wait so long, like, by the time you get your pizza, you're so hungry that, like when you eat it, it just tastes so good. So, like, DeFara's in Midwood in Brooklyn, I think I legitimately waited like 2 to 2.5 hours to eat there once, and it was like I hadn't had breakfast or lunch before, so I think by the time I ate it, I was like, this is the most amazing pizza I've ever had.
Well, I like that theory, though. So we waited like 25 minutes for John's, waited like 3 hours for DeFara's. You've waited 3 years for Totonno's.
Yeah. I guess it's got to be the best thing. Just not just pizza, but any food.
On this journey, Anthony and I tracked down and ate 7 iconic slices of New York pizza.
Denino's, Lombardi's, Grimaldi's, Arturo's, John's on the Upper West Side, Joe's on Carmine Street.
And despite how far we'd come, despite the recent developments, and despite how desperately we wanted to finish Jon Stewart's list, we still had no feasible way to get a slice of Totonno's pizza. We'd already been waiting for over 2 years, and who knows how many more we'd have to wait. Our 8-slice pizza journey was indefinitely stuck at 1 slice short of a whole pie. I couldn't get the image out of my head. A pizza with 7 slices. It's how I'd been feeling since I moved to New York. Like something was missing. If I ordered a pizza and it showed up with a slice missing, I'd call the place and tell them, hey, you didn't give me a pizza. It was the same feeling I got when I'd start to tell people I was from New York. It'd get stuck in my throat, and I worried that they'd look me up and down, recognize me for the fraud I was, and say, hey, you're not a real New Yorker. I didn't just need the last slice to complete this pizza journey. I needed the last slice to complete me. Anthony felt a little different.
Yeah, I'm mostly just getting to eat a bunch of old school pizza. That's really it.
No matter our individual stakes, after a few more months of waiting, we decided it was time to take matters into our own hands. We went back over our last big lead, the information that Michelle from Noshing NYC had given us about her Totonno's score.
It sounds like this foodie showed up, and it was closed, but there were people inside, and they just gave her a pizza because she asked. So
that's crazy.
So maybe we can just do the same thing. She even said in her message, she was like, they didn't know about my account, they didn't know that I was posting or reviewing. So we're both like, is it just open? Like, are we wrong? Do we just show up on a Saturday and get pizza?
Quick aside, Michelle said that she had gone to Totonno's on a Saturday. We had gone to the Cyclones game on a Wednesday. So maybe it just wasn't open on Wednesdays.
Yeah, maybe the answer all along has just been that we just go.
Just show up.
Yeah. There was no guarantee we'd get as lucky as Michelle, but sitting and waiting outside of Totonno's all day one Saturday was our best and only bet. We'd been waiting for years. What was one more day? But as luck would have it, before we ever got a chance to go wait all day on Coney Island, Totonno's posted an update on their Facebook page. There it was. After all our exploring, after the whole journey, after everything, we finally had a way to get Totonno's pizza. Anthony and I both live outside of Totonno's delivery window. So, we'd have to drive down to Coney Island, wait outside the store, and order it through an app. But we would finally be able to finish Jon Stewart's list. And that's what was really important. Right? Anthony and I disagreed a little about this one, too.
I personally am fine with that. I'm like, that's the pizza is present, it is cooked by the people that make it, and that is the only requirement I need to meet. But you feel different.
Yeah, I want to be in the restaurant. I want to see it getting baked. I want it like, we can get it fresh delivered. We can even get it so fresh delivered, it's just like one step outside of the front door. Mm-hmm. I want it even fresher. I want it realer than that.
So
I want to
get like literally just take out the minute it came out the oven, they put it in a box and they handed it to you.
Yeah.
That doesn't do it for you.
I mean, I'm sure. And if that's what we have to do, that's what we're going to do. But this whole thing has been about like exploring the city, finding a place, finding a home. I want to see the home of New York pizza.
Okay.
And yeah, not being able to get in the doors, I don't know, it feels a little hollow to get this far and to come so close and get like a half victory feels, a little empty for me.
I can feel you shouting at me through your screen. Don't worry, I'm not that much of an idiot. I know when to take the deal, and a half measure is way better than no measure at all. I told Anthony, okay, we could go drive down and order delivery from Totonno's from right outside the building, as silly as I thought that was. But before we ever got a chance to do that, I got an email I wasn't expecting. One of the owners of Totonno's had responded to my request for an interview.
Hey now, La lasagna, la lasagna. A bottle of white, a bottle of red, perhaps a bottle of rosé instead. Get a table near the stream in our old familiar place, you and I, face to face. A bottle of
Here's what happened. Antoinette Balzano, one of Antonio Pero's grandchildren who runs Totonno's with her siblings, Cookie and Frankie, happily agreed to an interview once she got my message. But for reasons that I'll share with you in a bit, it was going to be extremely difficult for us to coordinate and shoot an on-camera, in-person interview in the restaurant, which is what I was hoping for. The short version is that Antoinette doesn't manage Totonno's from Coney Island anymore, and whenever Cookie's there, she is way too busy making pizza and filling orders to sit down for an interview. Instead, Antoinette invited us to come down to Totonno's and call her when we got there. She and Cookie were going to give me and Anthony special access to the inside of the restaurant, which is still not open to customers, and Antoinette was going to explain the history of her grandfather's pizzeria over the phone while we explored the building and looked at the wall photos in person. I couldn't agree fast enough. We agreed on a date, and Anthony and I made our way down to Coney Island to finish our pizza journey.
It's now or never. Come hold me tight.
When we got to Totonno's, there was a short line of people waiting for pizza. The store was accepting walk-up orders, but no one was allowed inside. It turns out, if we had waited all day one Saturday, we would have been successful. When we got to the front of the line, we realized it was Cookie herself who was taking all of the orders. We introduced ourselves and she invited us in for the interview. But she didn't have time to be interviewed herself, and she asked that we not film her or any of the staff that day. After we agreed to the ground rules, we got out our cameras, and I called up Antoinette.
Hello?
How are you? Can you hear me?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
We talked for over an hour. She introduced herself and her siblings.
My name is Antoinette Balzano. My grandfather was Anthony Pero, nicknamed Totonno. I'm a retired New York City educator. I've always been working behind the scenes of the business, but not at the location. That was Louise or Cookie, and my brother Frank. He's a patriarch. He's 82 years old.
She told me about her family history.
My grandfather had 4 children. My mother was the only one to be married. She married Alphonse Balzano, and she had Frank, of course he's Balzano, and me, but Cookie's name is Seminary. Her husband was the Jewish guy with the Italian last name.
Now that's unusual.
It is. He was the best pizza guy. The Jewish pizzaiolo, we used to call him. He was so funny. Oh, God. You would have loved him.
Then she told me about how her grandfather brought pizza to America.
Did you get the picture of the famous one that is used in mostly all of the TV shows and the media?
Yes, which I believe that's your grandfather and Lombardi. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a story to that, and I really wish I were in person to tell you about it, but my aunt and uncle were telling me for the longest time that Grandpa would say, go see my picture. My picture is in Lombardi's on Spring and Lafayette Street. So one night I said, we've heard this so many times over and over again. Why don't we take a ride to Little Italy in Manhattan and see what he's talking about? I don't believe nobody ever did this. So we find the restaurant, Lombardi's. We walk in, and Paul, there's this picture on the wall. I turned my head to the right. I felt like I was in a time capsule. And a gentleman about my age came over to see us, and his name was Gennaro Lombardi. And I said, who's this man? I pointed to the picture. He said, that's my grandfather. I said, well, this man is my grandfather. So here I am with 2 grandchildren. This is history, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Gennaro came from Italy before my grandfather, and he must have sponsored my grandfather, gave him the job at Lombardi's. They are the original pizzeria, but he's not the original pizzaiolo. My grandfather is the original pizzaiolo. That's the pizza man, pizza maker, right? Lombardi's was a grocery store first, and I think they made bread there, and then my grandfather's idea was, let's make pizza, because he was a baker in Italy. And that's how pizza began, from my grandfather. So he brought pizza to America.
When did you become the torchbearers for the business?
When Uncle Jerry got sick.
Totonno taught his son Gennaro, Jerry for short, how to make pizzas. And in turn, Uncle Jerry passed down the family secrets to Cookie.
So Cookie always worked there. So she was still working there, right? When Jerry was the owner, like. And then he just turned it over to the 3 of us. But my uncle was a singer, and my grandfather, this is the story I heard, used to say to him, you want to sing on radio? So he used to pick him up and make him sit on top of the radio. Now you're singing on the radio, he said.
Antoinette taught me a lot of unexpected things about Totonno's. But this next one is my favorite.
That building was wheeled over and plopped there.
Wait, where would it wheeled from?
It was wheeled from across the street. The original place was across the street, the big street we used to call it growing up, and over across the little street. You know what I mean? The big street and the little street?
Yeah.
You believe this is how we talk. It was right on that corner. God. And they wheeled it over.
It's the same building, but it's, you know, like 100 feet over?
Yep.
As one of New York's most legendary pizzerias, Totonno's has received plenty of acclaim, including an epic claim from Zagat that only God makes better pizza, a place of honor in a 2018 episode of the Netflix original series Somebody Feed Phil, and a coveted spot on the prestigious list of America's classics from the James Beard Foundation. I asked Antoinette about any other awards or accolades Totonno's has received. She laughed and told me what her sister Cookie had said to that question in the past.
When I tell you that my sister's funny, she doesn't mean to be funny. So when they interviewed her and they asked her, you know, do you want to be in a contest? She says, contests are for amateurs. We never joined a contest. As a matter of fact, a show came out, it was from the Food Network. And the guy called us and he said that we were going to be on a TV show. I said, are you sure it's not a contest? We don't do contests. No, I promise you it's not a contest. Well, my brother, myself, and my sister, we're each watching the program. And my brother called me up. He said, Annette, this is a contest. They talk about the best pizzas and they show you the first one was number 5. They did a countdown. Then I'm telling you, Paul, I had stomach pains because I said, I told that guy that we don't do contests. And then they did number 4, and then they did number 3. Well, they did number 2. I started to cry because I knew we were number one in America by the Food Network.
By this point in the journey, I had a pretty good idea about the difference between real New York pizza and the rest. But while I had her ear, I wanted to hear the answer straight from Totonno's granddaughter.
What do you think makes something New York pizza versus just regular old pizza?
You know, Paul, I have a slogan that says, I live by it. There's pizza and then there's Totonno's. My brother says, oh, people have good pizza. But nobody has brought pizza to America. Nobody has that. We stand alone. You know, it's 99 years, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So next year is our 100th year. When you ask me about real New York pizza, I can't answer that because 99 out of 100 people would say to you, oh, the cheese or the tomato. When I don't see cheese. I see the passion that goes into it. I see my Uncle Jerry as a little girl. I'd watch him. It was almost rhythmic, the way he would bang out the dough and be like this, dun, 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 dun. I can hear it now. We're the only pizzeria continually run by the same family for 99 years. How could you put me in a class with anybody? You know, my sister gets the tomato cans delivered. If there's a little pinhole of a dent in the can, she sends it back. I mean, the chairs in that place, she won't change the chairs. It's got to stay the same way that it was. How do you compare? I don't think there's another nut that's doing something like this. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm very passionate because nobody has what we have. Besides being the first, there would be no pizza if it were for him. You know, so when you say to me, what's New York pizza, it's Totonno's.
She's not alone in that. As Food Network put it,
when people say New York style, they mean Totonno style.
Next, I wanted to finally get to the bottom of why they had been closed for 3 long years. Anthony and I had always assumed that Totonno shut down just because of the pandemic. But the truth was far more tragic.
So everyone shut down for the pandemic, but I wanted to ask you why it took you so much longer to reopen.
No, did I tell you why? Because of Lawrence. He had a terrible, terrible event 5 years ago.
Lawrence is Cookie's son. He had worked at the pizzeria with his parents for years. He stepped up as a partner when his father Joel unexpectedly passed away in 2004. And he was preparing to carry on the Totonno's torch when the time came for Cookie to step down. Along with his mom, aunt, and uncle, Lawrence embodies the heart of Totonno's. And he is Antonio Pero's youngest and final descendant. But Lawrence suffered a tragedy in late 2018.
He went to the hospital with bronchitis, and they didn't watch him, and he died, and then they revived him. So now he's in a wheelchair, and that's where Cookie and I spend our life, other than the pizzeria, taking care of my nephew. I don't know how we do it every day. I pray every day and thank the Lord for our blessings.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, listen, he's living and we're blessed. But I can't even tell you what my feelings are, Paul, because I'm still numb. Yeah. I mean, you have a perfectly normal guy, and you go see him at 10 o'clock at night, and he's dead, and he'll never be the same the next morning. Life is over as we knew it. Look, there's bad things that happen to people, but when it happens to you, I'm still in shock. And, we're not young, and this has been a very big burden. And then the pandemic was at the same time. My nephew was high risk. The doctor said he would die. So I couldn't let Cookie go in there and be around people and contract the disease and bring it home to her son. So we could not open.
I offered what little condolence I could. And then I asked what had changed their minds after being closed for 3 years.
What made you decide to reopen? Was it the fact that the 100th anniversary was coming up?
No, the emails, the texts, the people asking for it. I mean, they ask with such passion. And there's the stories, Paul. I have people who are 7 years old telling me, Grandpa took me in. They want to bring it back. And I said, we have to do this to keep Grandpa's legends alive. So now I said, look, the best thing to do, because people are writing to us and they want Totonno's back, the best thing we could do is online, which we're doing with the 4 platforms, Slice, Uber Eats, Grubhub, and DoorDash. We weren't going to take any orders from the street, but I think she says people come to the door and she takes the orders, so she's doing that. And we just started to ship throughout America through the company called Go Belly.
Anthony and I struggled for years to get a slice of Totonno's pizza, but you don't have to. They are currently open for business on Saturdays and Sundays, and available to everyone. And I mean everyone. If you're watching this video in the United States, you can order some Totonno's pizza straight to your door right now from Goldbelly. But if you're in New York, I recommend coming down yourself for a fresh pie.
I have to tell you, more than the money, everybody needs money and everybody wants more money, of course. But the reason we did Goldbelly was we wanted the name to get out because that's where my grandfather belongs. His name has to get out throughout the country, and that's really why I did this. Cookie always said, we don't know how to make money, we know how to make pizza. Today, Paul, it's about the buzz, and if you don't do social networking, you're going to lose that buzz. And what's happening is the people that remember us are dying. Remember when they were, coming in as a child? They're old. But I haven't been doing anything, Paul. I don't do any social media but Facebook.
Finally, I asked Antoinette about the future of Totonno's.
I never had children, and Cookie, her husband, passed away. It's only my brother, me, Cookie, and Lawrence. We're gone. That's it.
Yeah.
I would like to sell and try to relax, but I know she wants to make 100 years. That's the other thing. She really wants to be in the pizzeria because, she's been doing nothing but doctors and hospitals for 5 years with her son. Paul, there's so much I could do as the granddaughter of the man who brought pizza to America, but I don't have the time. Now I'm taking care of my nephew.
You guys have more energy than a lot of my friends, so I wouldn't worry about that.
I bet.
I'm not joking.
I don't want to get worn down. Paul, what do I do now if we don't make the 100 years?
Well, you gotta at least, one more year. If you made it through the pandemic, there's nothing that can keep you down.
Despite all they've been through, Totonno's always perseveres to keep serving pizza, and they are still currently on track to be open through 2024, which means next year, they'll become the first and only continuously run New York pizzeria to reach their true 100th anniversary. Totonno's story is not over. They have plenty more pizza making days ahead of them, but this story is almost over. I had kept Antoinette on the phone for over an hour, so I emphatically thanked her again and let her get back to her busy schedule.
But for now, I've taken so much of your time. I truly cannot thank you enough. This has been wonderful.
No, don't thank me. I thank you for listening. I really do, Paul. I feel like it's Grandpa that he deserves this.
We got our pizza, thank you, Cookie, and walked down to the boardwalk. Then, at long last, we ate the last slice. Pizza was angelic. Forget what it had taken us to get to this point. It was just really good pizza. The sauce, a perfect balance of sweet and acidic, bursting with flavor. The cheese, rich, creamy, a perfect complement to the sauce in both taste and texture. The crust was the perfect thickness and the perfect char. 11 out of 10, easily my favorite slice on Jon Stewart's list. Hell, just my favorite slice. As we looked out over the water, across the Atlantic, and towards the faraway shores of Europe, I thought about pizza. Pizza came to this country across the ocean from Italy. But here, in this place, in New York City, it found a home. Throughout this journey, I've wondered when you become a real New Yorker. Is it when you've been here long enough? Or is it something you just call yourself regardless of what anyone else thinks? Maybe it's something you have to take for yourself, even if it doesn't belong to you. Or maybe it's about leaving your mark, or staking your claim, or becoming part of this city's story. I never really came to a good conclusion. So, I asked a real New Yorker for help. Just as someone that has lived here for decades, can you tell me what you think it takes for someone to be a New Yorker? Oh yeah, I asked a few others too.
I do consider myself a New Yorker, but a New Yorker is anybody who, when they leave New York, and then they come back to it, they feel like they're being reintroduced to oxygen. I think that's a New Yorker.
be a New Yorker, you gotta have the spirit of feeling at home here, and both tolerance and love for the craziness of this town. New York would have a very tiny population if you only consider New Yorkers to be those who were born here.
But I think my favorite answer came from someone who's been on this ride with me the whole time.
It's not like there's like a list of things you do and then bam, you're a New Yorker. Kind of like you, I don't really know if I'm even a true New Yorker yet, even though this is probably the place I've lived the longest. I don't know if you ever know truly, unless you were like born and raised and you know it in your bones. But I think eventually just you live in the city, you experience it, and it changes you, and you probably just become more a New Yorker than you are anything else.
I think Anthony's right. You can't just check items off a list, or even just eat 8 slices of iconic pizza, and expect to belong somewhere. You just move to a new place, and you experience it, and hopefully it starts to feel like home.
But enjoying the local favorites definitely doesn't hurt.
Antoinette agreed.
What do you think makes someone a New Yorker?
Drinking the water. There is no water like New York. Going to the beach. There's no beach in the world like Coney Island, and my mother said so. Have you been to the Coney Island beach?
Yes.
Have you been to the aquarium?
Yep.
Okay, so you've done. And you've been to the Yankee game?
I've been to a Yankee game.
Have you been to Little Italy?
Yes.
Walk on 42nd Street? I mean, this is what makes a New York, but, and of course a trip to Nathan's and have the hot dog.
I've had a Nathan's hot dog.
Yeah, you're a true New Yorker. And I say, if you haven't eaten Totonno's pizza, you haven't lived.
I've spent the last 8 years of my life wondering if I belong in this city. And I spent the last 2 of those years hunting down 8 slices of pizza that I hoped would fill a home-shaped void in my chest. A missing piece. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a New Yorker. I've lived in this city for 8 years, and I've eaten 8 slices of the best pizza it has to offer. But more important than the slices themselves were the steps I took to get them, and the people I was lucky enough to enjoy those slices with. I still don't know exactly what it takes to be able to say that you're from this city, or from anywhere really. But I do know what it takes to find a home. Home is wherever you feel like you belong. And for me, as long as there are people I want to share a pizza with nearby, I'll know I'm home.
Sea, somewhere waiting for me. My lover stands on golden sands and watches the ships that go sailing somewhere.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching the whole video. If you'd like to see more stories like this, please consider joining my Patreon page for between $1 and $5 a month. I have so many more stories like this that I want to tell. A lot of deep dives, mysteries, and current and past adventures. The more people sign up, the faster I can make more videos. Patrons get access to exclusive content, like a bonus video where I talk about the making of this project, previously unreleased videos and skits from my past, my monthly newsletter, and so much more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Really good pizza.